Hi, welcome to Negotiate Value Lesson 16. Can you believe we're 75% through the course already? We're entering the final module, and yet we haven't talked about one of the most important parts of negotiating. Pie. How big is the pie? Where are we cutting the pie? How big is your piece of the pie? How big is my piece? This is a classic metaphor for negotiation, and I think I understand why. It connects so easily to the pie chart, which represents 100%, and then wherever we cut that determines how the resources are allocated. How much do you get? How much do I get? This represents the classic approach of win-lose negotiation. That is, there's a fixed amount, and when we're negotiating, we're figuring out who gets what. Sometimes you'll talk to an attorney who will say, well, where do we slice the salami in this deal, right? Same sort of thing. Where do we cut the pie, slice the salami? How big is your piece, and how big will my piece be? Now, this dominated negotiation for a long time, and then someone came up with a better idea. What's that? More pie, a bigger pie. The idea that instead of just discussing where we were allocating what was there, we could look at how to make more for everybody. So as you can imagine, I really like this idea, and I'm sure you do too. You've probably heard of it. Things like making the pie bigger, how do we grow the pie, enlarge the pie, embiggen the pie, right? Ways to create more value in the relationship instead of just dividing up what's there. This correlates very strongly, as you may recognize, to our idea of raising the benefit. And we said early on in this negotiation course, it's not just about moving that price up or down, depending on whether you're buying or selling, but it's about creating more benefit overall so there's more value to share between everybody in the negotiation. So I like this idea of a bigger pie and making the pie bigger. And I'm all for nice guys doing well and finishing first. But there's a little bit of a problem when people talk about moving from win-lose negotiation to win-win negotiation. What is that? Well, you can see it in the picture, and I want you to just see this for a minute, because once you get to that bigger pie, you still have to decide where you're going to cut it. And it still applies that as you get more, they get less, and as they get more, you get less. So that dynamic is exactly the same between the little pie and the bigger pie. The only difference is you have more resources to cut it out of, and that's a good thing. But the idea that when you move to win-win negotiation, you're sort of getting away from win-lose negotiation is a fallacy. And it's a dangerous one. So often I hear this idea of, well, I'm not a win-lose negotiator, I'm a win-win negotiator. I'm collaborative. I help create more value as I negotiate. And I like that, but the reality is it's always zero-sum. Every negotiation is zero-sum at some point, meaning that we get to the point in the negotiation where you're talking about the financial number, and as it moves one way, it's directly in the other party's interests, which is directly against your interests. So at some point, those two things collide, and you can't just be a nice guy throughout and be looking out for the other guy completely, because it's your job to watch out for your pie and to get the most pie. Conversely, it's their job to watch out for their side of the pie. So it's important to embrace this reality that it's always zero-sum, and you always have to be watching where that number is in a negotiation. Now, what does this mean? This means that you want to take control of the negotiation to the extent possible. When I say that, again, you might go to some almost comical exaggerations that happen in negotiations. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I set an appointment with you for a negotiation, but then a day before the appointment, I cancel it. Then I call up a few days later and I make an appointment, but then I call the morning of the appointment and I move it half an hour earlier. So you have to come earlier to the negotiation. Now, I tell you to bring 3 people, but I got 6 people. So in case a fight breaks out, right, I'll have more people. I seat you on that side of the table. We're all seated on this side of the table. We're in high chairs, but you're in low chairs. And they're broken, so you can't fix them if you fiddle with them. I've got it you so the sun's coming in, I've timed it just right, so the sun's going to be in your eyes during the meeting and you'll be uncomfortable. And then I'm going to crank up the heat too, so you're also sweating, and I'm not going to give you water to drink. Now there's a laundry list of tactics that can be used to take control of a negotiation. However, I would advise against all those tactics, okay? That's sort of cartoonish, but you will see that people do use those superficial control tactics in negotiations. In my experience, the reason I don't recommend that is because, one, it's kind of a pain to manage that. 2, it generally has the effect of ticking off the people you're negotiating with. And again, what I find is that if I'm annoying the people I'm trying to negotiate with, that's not really in my interest. That doesn't help me out. So I don't do that. So what I do recommend is that you pay attention to a few things which you absolutely do want to take control of. And what are those? Well, a lot of this course has been designed around understanding and taking control of those items. The first one is the value drivers. You need to decide what drives your value, what's important to you, and nobody else can do that for you. That's really what the whole second module, Know Thy Benefit, was all about. Secondly, you want to control the pricing anchors. You don't want them to say, well, this is the right price, and then have it sort of build from that. You want to decide what the right price should be. And if you're having trouble remembering about that, go back to lesson 5, Anchors Away, which we discuss how to deal with pricing anchors and set better anchors. And then finally, what we'll talk about a little bit more right now is being in control of the process and the timing. That is, you want to buy, how you want to buy, and when you want to buy. You don't want them to be in control of that. So that brings us directly to the homework. The homework is write your plan. Now, how are you going to be in control of the process if you don't know what the process is? So the first part of controlling the process is understanding what you want it to be and actually writing it down so you got a very strong guidance on what that process is. So what we're going to do now is talk through a couple of examples, one from the buying side and one through the selling side, of what a good process is for negotiation. So let's start when you're the buyer. And these may be a little small on the screen, but you also get them in your materials. And I encourage you to go back and refer to these as you write out your process and do your homework. What I'm going to illustrate here is one sample process, and then you take this for a purchase that's coming up for you and write the process that really applies to you. So I'll just run through the steps real quickly. The first step would be to agree on the goals of the project, what you're buying, and then how you're going to measure it. The second step would be to conduct initial research. That is, do some web research, find out a little bit about the industry, the kind of solutions that are offered, and some of the vendors that are available. Third, have some exploratory calls with 4 vendors. I picked 4. It's a great number. If you're going to call a few vendors, you just get a wide sample when you talk to 3 or 4, and it only takes a couple of hours to have those phone calls. Then fourth, refine the scope and requirements. So now you've done your research, now you've had some calls, you can go back and say, okay, let's say this is a little bit tighter what we're buying and why we're buying it. Then 5, send out an RFP, send out requests for proposals to 6 vendors. This may vary depending on what you're buying, but 6 is a good number. Then step 6, to review the proposals and the pricing. Step 5, to refine and negotiate the pricing with the vendors. And there may be implied a down select there where you go from the 6 vendors to the 3 or 2 that are really leaders. Then finally, step 8, review the terms and the contract and then make the vendor decision. So you might alter this. You might have a more robust and lengthy process for a more strategic or higher dollar value expense, or you may cut out a few steps from here if you're buying something that's more mundane. But you want to have a process even for the smaller purchases, and as the homework, you want to write it down. So when you're buying, write this down. Now, let's take another view from the selling perspective, and we'll see that it's actually not that different. When you're selling, you tend to feel like, well, they're going to drive the process, that's their money, but that's really not the case. You can drive it yourself, and here's an example plan of how you might define your plan for driving the process. The first step would be to identify potential customers. Who are those that might want to buy? Then begin discussions to see what the interest is and have preliminary calls with those suitors, those that might actually buy what you're selling. Then refine your offer and your terms to make it more appealing to them and to see where the value is based on what you've learned from them, and follow up with the suitors. Who's interested? Then ask for some bids. Tell them that, well, this is the time frame, we're going to sell it during this time, and we need to know if you're going to bid on it. After the bids come in, you can negotiate the bid, negotiate the terms, whatever's driving the value for you and for the buyer, and then make the client decision and make the award. Now, depending upon what you're selling, again, it may be that people are coming to you and maybe that you've got a lot wider supply of what you're selling, but some sort of process is going to be appropriate no matter what it is you're selling or no matter what it is you're buying. So the homework, again, is to take these processes and write down your specific process for a purchase or for a sale that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. And if you need to, scroll back in the video and see what those lists are, or look at your materials and you have them there as well. So my final tip is stick to the plan. It's great to have a plan. You need to write the plan, but it's even better to stick to the plan and follow it through. We'll be discussing that a little bit more in the next lesson. But one tip is, after you've written it, to send it to somebody. Email it to somebody else on your team. Especially when you have a team buying situation, it can be pretty hard to stick to that plan, but if you make it more public and say you're committed to it, you'll be much more likely to do it. That's it for this lesson. I'll see you next time.